Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It is me, Austin, another solo episode today. So, this time of year, it is starting to get nice out. It's getting warm out. For those of us who live in the Pacific Northwest, that generally means not only do we get to have beautiful summers and go to the lake, but it also means we're starting to enter wildfire season. So, for all of you guys listening out there, we're going to be talking about wildfire season, kind of how to prepare for that from a Minuteman or preparedness side of things. We're talking about some body armor stuff today, getting into a little current events and kind of hit all over. But before we dive too far into that, I do got to make a shout out to BLACKOUT Coffee. BLACKOUT Coffee is an awesome sponsor of ours. We've got a discount code for you guys down in the descriptions of this episode, whether you're watching it on Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else this podcast is played. You will find it down there. You can use the code in the description to get 20% off your first order. It's awesome coffee. It's pretty decent, and they support us. They support pro-Second Amendment causes, and we support them. Also, if you're looking for a good leather holster, 1791 gun leather, they sent me some stuff recently. I've been really digging some of their holsters as far as like nice, comfortable concealment, especially in the summertime. That leather really helps out with, instead of having Kydex kind of making me all sweaty. So, really good, awesome holsters. Also, in the description, there will be a discount thing in there for you guys as well. If you're looking for a good, decent leather holster, they've got them for all kinds. Whether you're rocking a semi-auto or revolver or anything else, no matter how tactical your pistol is, they've got something for it, and they can also do custom orders. So, jumping right into it. It's June. It's nice. It's warm. To where I'm at right now, it's about 85. With that being said, though, it's also super windy, and there's been a level 3 evacuation in not where I'm at necessarily, but on the other side of the county from where I'm at for some people during a wildfire. And it just kind of made me thinking about today that, as we enter June and as we go through the seasonal cycles, it's one of those things to where if you haven't already, it's probably a good reminder to just go ahead and start going through your go bags, go through your assault packs, go through your gear. And if you haven't already started changing stuff out for the seasons, now is the time to do that. When it comes to your go bags, comes to certain things, there should be some stuff in there that's universal that just stays all the time. But I also understand that we move stuff around depending on weather, depending on climate. If you're in a certain area where you get a lot of snow in the wintertime, you're probably going to have more winter gear in your kit or your go bag whenever you're preparing for something like that. Versus, in June, you probably don't need a 3-layer coat. You might just need, some light layers, things like that. So go back ahead and make a quick reminder to go through your stuff. Make sure you go through your go bags, summarize all your gear, summarize your go bags, take out that winter stuff, swap out with that lighter stuff or the other things that you need for summertime. Make sure you're stocked up on water and ways to replace that. Also, again, with wildfire season, guys, if you're in an area where that's a thing, I know I am, it's always good to make sure that you have your go bags packed, make sure they're ready, not just for you, but for your family. And outside of just having like a Minuteman preparedness go bag, make sure you've got like personal valuables or anything that you really don't want to burn down in a fire. Make sure you've got some kind of way to get those quickly. Personal documents, things like that might be a good reminder to go through some of those things we don't normally talk about. Things like birth certificates, social security cards, things like that. Important documentation that really sucks to have to go through the hassle to get replaced. If it were lost in a fire, family photos, things like that. Maybe have a separate bag packed of just some of those, hard to replace or irreplaceable items that you have around your home in case you do run into an issue where you do have to evacuate for a fire. It's always nice to make sure that you have that stuff ready to go and that you have your go bags packed. So, just kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit with the changing of the seasons as we get into that. I know that is, not everybody has to deal with wildfires. Some people have their other natural disasters they have to face, but it's just kind of a good reminder overall. Just, that time of year, go through your stuff, replace your batteries, check all your gear, maybe take out that, 6-layer sleeping bag you have, replace it with your summer bag, that kind of thing. Just make sure that you're ready for summertime with your gear and your kit. Make sure you've got plenty of water, plenty of ways to hydrate, plenty of ways to get clean water, because you will need it as it starts getting hotter out there, especially the more you're training. So, with that being said, let's kind of get into the main body of what we're talking about today. So, what kind of spurred this on for me with this conversation we're going to have here about body armor was a lot of the AR 500 or Armored Republic or whatever they're calling themselves now on their social media, a lot of their social media advertising that they've been putting out there to try to advocate steel over ceramic. And I kind of just want to discuss some of these things because it bothers me a little bit that this is such a widely pushed out thing by them and widely believed thing by so many people. I remember back in the day, 10 years ago, AR 500 was kind of the thing for if you wanted to get, if you wanted to get ceramic plate, I mean, if you wanted to get body armor and you wanted to get it affordable and you were okay with kind of understanding that there was some risk to certain things with it, whether it comes to spalling, whether it came to certain types of aspects of protection that you were willing to forego in order to have something instead of nothing. And so, we all kind of made sacrifices here and there depending on what our budgets were. And, and I remember I had AR-500 plates at one point, and for me it was 100% a monetary thing. I couldn't afford ceramics at the time. There were, good ones were over $1,000. The cheapest ones I think I can remember finding were like $600 or $700 a plate at the time. There may have been cheaper ones out there, but I wasn't well versed in that world. And really at the time, that's all I knew was these cheap plates. And that's kind of where AR-500's at, is kind of this idea of like the affordable affordable armor for the everyday man. And that's kind of where they started. And it was, it's not a bad place to start. It's not a bad niche. And, it was this argument that it was like, well, it's having something better than nothing. And they were heavier than most plates that were out there. They were a little thicker than most plates that were out there. And they've come a long way, I'll give them that. When it comes to the technology and science behind what they've done, they've managed to get the plates lighter, thinner, and still be just as ballistic, which is really awesome, right? They've got some updated coating liners and stuff like that on there. I'm not knocking them as being a bad company, and I'm not knocking them for wanting to sell a product. They're a company. That's what they have to do. But, they recently put out a thing to me that was like, because they've been putting out a lot of, or let me just say it this way, that one of the things I think as a company that I think is actually really awesome for them is that they do kind of stand behind what their personal beliefs are, and they let you know what they are up front, right? And much like T-Rex Arms, they're not ashamed of their Christian values and beliefs as a company that they put out there, or at least that they say that they believe in, right? And whether they actually believe it or not, I'm not sure, but they promote a lot of Christian value stuff. I kind of like that personally myself. You may not, that's not really necessarily the point of it, but that's one thing I like that they do as a company. Now, one of the things they said in one of those videos, though, that kind of caught my attention was that they said the reason that they do that is because they want you to know the values behind the type of company so you can trust them. Okay, so I thought that was interesting that they say that, because then they go on to make several points about steel armor that they claim are superior reasons as to why steel is better than buying ceramic plates and spending more money. So we're going to kind of summarize what they say and kind of my rebuttal to this. So one of the things that I think was one of their more interesting arguments was they kind of make this argument that logistically, for the average person, steel makes more sense. Now, here's their argument for that. They say that logistically, steel is easier to acquire, to replace, things like that, than ceramic would be. And the scenario they give is if you're in an issue to where you take a round of the plate, that the steel plates can continue taking continue taking hits, just like a steel target that you would shoot can continue taking hits over time. And, it's not going to be 2 or 3 hits and it's done. You can continuously use it for longer periods of time. Obviously, depending on the caliber and the type of ammunition you've been hit with, you could use this for an extended period of time. You could take multiple hits. You could basically use one plate for a much longer amount of time than you could a ceramic plate. To where their argument is that, if you take a couple rounds to the ceramic plate, your plate's shot, you're done, you got to get a new plate, or, you just don't have any plates and you're done with that and you're out of the game. I understand where they're coming from logistically from that argument, right? That yes, steel is obviously a much harder, denser material than ceramic. You could probably take some more abuse. I know when they first came out, there was videos about like, oh, look, I shot it 75 times with shotgun slugs, no penetration, right? And while stopping penetration is an important part of body armor when it comes to finding the type of body armor that you need, it's not like the end-all do-all. It's not like, okay, I don't have a hole in me, I'm fine. Because ultimately, it's not so much, the hole in you definitely can kill you, for sure. But it's also like the internal trauma and the internal bleeding and then the taking that amount of force and impact to you, right? One of the things that I think ceramic kind of has above the steel is kind of the distribution of force, right? You still have to consider the fact that even if you're an advocate of steel plates, if you get hit with a round, that energy is coming direct and it's not dispersing throughout the plate like it does with some of the ceramic plates or things like that. Even if you're running a trauma pad, it's coming straight into you, right? So it's hitting you and it's not dispersing, it's hitting straight. So it's kicking that 7-pound steel plate directly into your chest, right? So some of the simple things that we're looking at with this, we're looking at potential internal bleeding. We're looking at broken ribs, broken bones, punctured lungs, like very serious injuries, right? To where, even with ceramic, yeah, you're going to still have some of those same things. Sorry, just because you have a ceramic plate doesn't mean you're not going to break a rib or whatever. Especially depending, again, on some the large calibers that are out there that hit you. You might have, less back face deformation, they'll claim, with certain steel plates. Sure, great. But it's not so much that that's going to necessarily make that much of a difference because, yeah, well, the bullet didn't necessarily deform the metal. It still slammed it into your chest. Just like with a ceramic plate, even if you have that back face deformation and it's kind of punching you in that gut in that certain area, it might cause some internal issues. But again, the idea is it's stopping that bullet. So, they both kind of have some of the same issues there. But to make this a logistical argument, to make this an argument to say like, oh, well, it's if it's SHTF, you can just keep running the same plate over and over again, just take so many hits. This way of thinking, I think, is kind of messed up, right? Because it's like, one, what are you doing that you're getting shot so much, right? Like honestly, think about that. Like, what are you doing in an SHTF scenario as a normal person, right? That is requiring you to embrace this idea of taking hit after hit after hit after hit after hit to your steel plate. I mean, like, really, you could make the argument like, oh, well, Austin, they're talking about like taking a burst of fire and taking like 3 hits across the chest. Like, you could make that argument, but that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about like going years into the apocalypse with just the single steel plate, And for me, it's like, okay, if we look at the statistics of this, I was looking some of this up before the show to kind of see like how often, during the war in Iraq, how often were people getting in firefights as far as like to the point of needing to replace their plates. And it's a little hard statistic to follow up on and get like specific numbers on this. But basically what I was finding out was, for the most part, right, you have to consider the fact that even in an active war zone, everyone wearing plate armor, not everyone is getting hit in the plate, right? Not everyone's getting hit, period. Plenty of people aren't even getting in combat in an active war zone. Even using like the war in Ukraine, for example, right? Not everyone's getting hit all the time. You're not constantly getting into firefights. Even if you're getting into firefights, you're not constantly taking rounds to the chest consistently, right? So this whole idea that like, oh, you're getting some kind of scenario where you're just constantly taking rounds like Terminator, da-da-da-da-da. If you as an average person have this idea that like that the apocalypse is going to somehow be more intensely violent than an active war zone, whether it be Iraq, Afghanistan, or Ukraine, I think you're misjudging your capabilities and what that's going to look like to you. Like, a majority of your time, probably in an SHTF scenario, it's going to be focused on basic survival: food, water, shelter, power if it's a thing, trying to maintain the necessities of life, and then defending those from others if it comes to that. The odds of like really getting into something to where you're in an active component in an active war zone to that degree are probably fairly limited for the most of us. Even for the actual military, if you break it down by percentage, a very small percentage, less than 20% of the actual, less than 20% of even combat arms are actually getting into the fight and actually taking rounds. And of those guys taking rounds, and a significantly smaller portion are taking rounds to the plates or taking rounds to the body, period, and anywhere. And then of those people, how many needed to replace their plates afterwards, right? It's a very small degree. So this idea to like try to sell your product on the idea that like, oh, everyone's just going to be getting shot in the chest all the time and constantly be replacing plates, I think it's it's kind of a dumb thing to me. Like, it doesn't make sense a whole lot. You might disagree and be like, no, that makes sense to me. Like, and that's your prerogative. But to me, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It seems like you're kind of selling on this idea of the unrealistic. And I understand like being prepared for everything all the time, but it just seems like you're selling on the wrong idea. You're definitely selling on this idea of fear. But with that as well, it's one of these things that you beg the question. If it's a logistical issue, right? You'll ask, people like, okay, well, if it's a logistical issue, why is it that large organizations that have large chains of logistics or would be worried about logistics? For example, like, let's look at the military, right? Yes, the United States military have a large budget. They do. But they're also, in many areas, penny pinchers. How can we save money? How can we go with the lowest bidder? How can we do this? And so if steel armor was so effective, right, at what they say, and steel armor is so easily to be reused, I find it very hard to believe that like the U.S. military, or any military for that matter, or any any single police force across the United States wouldn't be running it, because if it makes sense logistically that you could just keep reusing it, that would seem like, the wet dream of a police department low on funding, or of a military unit low on funding. They're like, oh, hey, we can give this to these guys, and we can just keep reissuing these plates, do some minor maintenance on it if it takes a round, and just continue forward. Like, that's great. No, that's not realistic, because even if that was the case, if those things get damaged anyway, people are going to replace them out of liability. You know what I mean? And if it's so much cheaper to run steel, but it's so much more effective, how come we don't see a single police department across the country running it? Like, not even the military, right? Which has differing standards on what's considered acceptable, and you can't just, have one unit go out and run steel and one unit, run ceramic or anything like that. Let's just look at like similar, like just police departments. How come we don't see police departments run this? How come we don't see people going out there and do this? Like, I'm sure there is somebody out there who brought privately owned plates, something like that, for security, or privately owned plates for, maybe there is a small police department that was like, hey, you can buy your own if you want. That's what they went with. But, like, as a whole, like, department funding, how come we don't see people going with this? Right? You would think, look, logistically, if it made sense, that's where your money would be spent. It's like, oh man, steel would be, this game-changing thing. You can take so many hits. You can do all this different stuff. You can just keep reissuing the same plates 20 years down the line. Because that's another thing that they mention, right? Is they mention the lifespan between ceramic and steel. They say that the steel has about a 20-year lifespan, whereas ceramic has a 5-year lifespan. And those lifespans aren't necessarily hard and fast rules. They're kind of like expiration dates on certain things, where it's like, it doesn't mean it's going to go bad that day. It just means that they can only guarantee it's going to hold up for a certain amount of time, I know, like, I've got a PAGST helmet. I've had two of them. One of them that I tested, and one of them that I haven't. I left alone. These are old helmets from the mid '80s that are old school Kevlar helmets. And after doing ballistic testing on one of them, it's held up to what it's rated for. 40 years later. So this idea of like this 5-year shelf life isn't necessarily the way. Another thing that they do too, to kind of convince you of like why you should go steel over the other, is they go from like chest height and drop both plates, right? And the idea behind this is like, oh, ceramic has the potential to crack if it's thrown down, or get real rough, things like that, versus the steel. And they're like, which one would you still trust your life to? And the dumb thing about this is that it's like ceramic plates, yes, when it comes to like taking impacts from like being dropped and things like this, the potential is there to crack. The potential is there to cause certain issues in the integrity of the plate. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the plate's going to immediately like shatter into a million pieces or be wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I was in the military for 10.5 years, wore armor most of the time, thrown it around in vehicles, thrown it around here and there. It's fallen off stuff, dropped on things, moved left and right, getting thrown around all over the place. No cracks. No damage, no issues, no worries. Like, they're made for combat. You can drop it from chest height and be fine. So it's this kind of idea when it comes to this. And I know I'm kind of just going on a tangent here with this whole AR-500 thing, but I really want to emphasize to people out there, because there's a lot of people who fall into this trap. That, like, look, if you want steel and you're just convinced about it, like, look, I'm not deterring you. Get whatever you think is best. But in my honest opinion, I just think that with all of the different stuff that's on the market, with how far we've come with ceramics and polyurethanes and all these different styles of body armor that are out there, that are lighter, that are thinner, that are just, that are better, in my opinion, than steel at, doing their job ballistically and, being life-saving, there are so many other options out there. I mean, again, you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it again, and I'll keep saying it. I'm a huge fan of RMA. I'm not paid by them. I'm not sponsored by them. I am a huge fan of RMA. They are an armor company. I think right now you can go and get level 4 ESAPI plates for $300 to $400 right now. I know a while back I bought some from RMA, probably about 2 years ago, and at the time they had a sale going on, and I could get 2 level 4 ESAPI plates and the carrier for it was just 2 level 4 ESAPI plates. They were multi-curve plate, multi-hit rated, and I think it was under $300, just under. I think it was just a tick over if you included shipping, right? That's almost identical pricing to what they charge for steel. And you're getting ceramic plates. They're lighter, they're better, they're they're going to do everything that the steel's going to do, but do it better. And you don't have to make the sacrifices. Another thing that AR-500 is always saying is like they're always talking about like how trying to minimize the idea of spalling, right? And saying like, oh, you have ceramic shards that go out of, ceramic plates just as much too, blah, 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 right? One, you can look on all of the different reviews. We've done this with ballistic dummies, with ballistic testing. Admin's got a great version of this. We've seen that this is blatantly false. We've seen time and time again that taking rounds with a steel plate does send those bullet fragments into disadvantageous places. We've seen, however, that when we shoot it with ceramic, even when we do have minor spalling, it's nowhere near as egregious. It's nowhere near as much of an issue. It's not it's generally not as harmful. Whereas the steel plates absolutely are. On top of that, to me, it's just doesn't really seem a point, because you can't even make the argument that you're strapped for cash when there's companies like RMA or other companies like that out there similar to them that are making body armor that is inexpensive, right? You can't even make the argument that like, it's a money thing. It's not, right? The longevity of it too. Again, coming back to this, what are you planning on doing? Like, how often do you intend to get shot in the chest that it would justify steel over ceramic, right? And this whole argument of like, oh, if you had ceramic plates and you get shot in the chest, then, you don't have any more body armor. So what? You know what I mean? Like, that's where my mind goes with this. It's like, okay, if you're doing something, right, you're out, doing goon boy stuff in the woods, you take rounds to the chest, even if you're wearing ceramic plates, you're probably down and out for a minute, right? Best chance scenario, you come away from that unscathed. More than likely, it might be a broken rib or bruised ribs, like you've got breathing issues, you've got internal bleeding, like there's all kinds of health issues that are secondary to that can come from that. So let's assume none of that happens. Okay, you either continue whatever you're doing with the busted plate, and when you get done, you either find anyone to replace it, or you just take it out. Move your back one to your front, and make sure you have, protection in the front. Even if you get hit in both, okay, then lose the plates. Now you've got a carrier with no plates. It's just the same as a chest rig at that point. Like, people have fought plenty of wars without body armor. We still do. We still have plenty of guys that run chest rigs, just chest rigs, or belt kit without body armor. Like, it's totally viable to be able to do something without body armor. Body armor is not the do-all, end-all of this, just like the same way like night vision is not the do-all, end-all of tactical doodads. So this whole idea that, like, you have to have, this ability to take, like, 10,000 rounds without dying, it's kind of asinine to think that, like, everyone's just going to be out here doing John Wick crap and getting hit like the beaches of Normandy every day. Like I said before, like, one of the guys I really like in this community is, and check him out if you haven't, is the Gray Pill, right? He does a very realistic job of being down to earth when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, most of what you're going to be doing, like growing potatoes, checking your wheat, making sure your tomatoes are growing, your cows are fed, you've got food and water for your family. Right? Most of you guys are going to be more focused on that than going out and doing direct action, hit and run, bad guy guerrilla stuff. Even if it really is like a war on American soil, most of us got families, right? Most of us have responsibilities. Those are going to probably be higher priority than going out and doing, smash and grab, hit and run, direct action, cool guy, bad guy stuff, right? If you're a single dude with nothing to lose, yeah, maybe you're more inclined to go do that, in which case, great, go do whatever. I would also probably imagine that at that point, if that's the case and you're one of those people, you're also not running steel plates. You're probably running some Hescos or some higher level, more expensive, super lightweight, ceramic plates. And that's my thing, is like, when we look at certain things, I understand the idea that, like, I started this channel on not having to look at like special operations or certain things like that to justify things, like to be like, look, I'm not that guy. How do I do things as a normal person? But if you look at these guys in the sense of, like, these are the guys who are doing this stuff all the time. You notice what you never notice? You notice what you never see? Steel plates. From people who are professionals, who are putting their lives in the line of duty every single day. You never see steel plates, right? You could make the argument like, oh, well, they have a bigger budget. They have all this money. Okay. Go to, like for example, I grew up in rural Washington, right? Very farm country type of areas, right? In a town of like 1,200 people, no budget for the police force. There was like 4 cops in the county, something like that. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. I think there was like 12 for the whole county. Like, no money for them. They had old cars, old guns, everything like this. Very low budget, right? You know what they weren't running? Steel. None of them ran steel. They all ran ceramic plates or Kevlar vests, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, no professional is out there running this. So when you look at certain things to judge the viability of them. I understand this argument that people make out there, but I just think that it's not in good faith when it comes to that. Now, if someone out there has steel plates or is listening to this and works for one of these companies or anything like that, I will more than willingly eat my words. If someone wants to send me some plates or send me something, and whatever they want me to do as a rundown to see what holds up better, what runs better, if you can change my mind, I'm open to that. Like I would love for you guys to open my mind to this. If it could be that the possibility of running $250 worth of plate, and that just saves the day, and you could save so much money, and that ceramics are overrated, sweet. I'm all about saving money because I don't have a whole lot of it. So if you can prove that to me, awesome. Hit me up on my Instagram, on my YouTube, on here, on my email, whatever. I am totally open to my mind being changed. Send me some plates. Let's do something. Let's figure out if we'll put it on YouTube. I'll make it full honest review of it. I want to see how this stands up. But the arguments that you guys are making on these videos to justify the steel armor, it just doesn't make sense to me. It just does not seem to me that there's any clear advantage over ceramic. So that's just my 2 cents on that. And I just got to put that out there that this has just been something I keep seeing again and again on my Instagram, and it just blows my mind how many people just eat this up. And I'm wondering how many of the dudes running steel armor are also the same guys that are running red anodized parts and everything. Because I don't know, it's just one of those things where it seems like they just got a reputation to where it's oh, well, it's just as good. Dude, why do you think no one runs it? Why do you see no one who's done this seriously for a long time run steel? It's just, what possible option do you think there could be? Why do you think everyone advocates for ceramic, So, anyway, moving on from the body armor thing, quick shout out again to another sponsor of the show, Parcel Safety. There is a link down below in the description. They are the maker of some pretty decent gas masks for a pretty decent price. I did a review on them on our YouTube channel. Worked out pretty well, at least against pepper spray. You can check out some of them. They are pretty affordable. They make really great masks. You can fit them with just about any 40mm filter that's out there. They make respirators, full face masks, the whole deal. So whatever you're looking for, you can check them out at Parcel Safety. Again, link in the description or in the show notes or wherever you're watching this, wherever basically the description of this is, there'll be a link down there to check that out as well. So moving forward, we kind of look around. We've come kind of out of the body armor discussion a little bit. We've touched on our wildfires, kind of moving towards a little bit of current events. One thing that I think is kind of interesting as we kind of see things devolve, both politically and internationally with the United States. At the time of recording this, it's June the 11th. So at this point in time, Russian warships, you've probably seen the news about Russian warships heading on their way down to Cuba. We've also got reports of Russian warships preparing to do joint naval exercises with the Egyptian Navy in and around the Suez Canal. Chinese Navy is doing war games, supposedly, and training exercises surrounding Taiwan. And what we see here is kind of this international political game where this is kind of a response by the Russians against the United States telling Ukraine that it's okay to use weapons that we've provided them for offensive operations against Russian soil. Prior to this, we were pretty much telling them, hey, you can use it within your own borders for attacks, defense, whatever, but we don't want American weapon systems hitting Russian homeland. And recently, the Biden administration changed that and said, yeah, go ahead, knock yourself out. So the issue with this is now we have American weapons hitting directly onto Russian soil. And regardless of what your opinions are on the Ukraine war, one, I don't really care. And two, we got to look at the big picture here. They see this as a direct attack by NATO. They have since day one. Russia's been looking at this as the West, right, and rightfully so, basically using Ukraine as a proxy to attack Russia. So in response, obviously they're sending their navy down to Cuba. They're sending their navy to the Suez Canal. And I think for a lot of us, even if this is just a big thing of political posturing, which I think realistically that's what it is, I think it's a military exercise for the Russians to see, can their navy do what they think it can and get to these locations potentially. But also, it's kind of a political posturing of oh, you did this, we're going to do this. We don't know what actually wants to start shooting at each other yet, but you puff your chest, I puff my chest. So when we look at this, it's one thing to consider, though, is that the Suez Canal part is interesting to me. Because if anyone remembers, about 3 years ago, either mid-2020 or mid-2021, there was that the Evergreen ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is responsible for a huge part of international trade. And I remember I was in Bahrain on a deployment at the time, and there was a lot of stuff that just didn't make it. There was a lot of stuff they started to kind of run out certain things here and there because that thing blocked that area for so long. It caused something like, I think it was like $85 billion in trade or something like that. It was ridiculous. It was an insane amount of money that it stopped for like every hour that it was blocking. It would stop, X amount of millions of dollars of international trade. Well, if you think about Russia's proximity to the Suez Canal, right? The Black Sea is not that far. So if you have Russia, if Russia were to do something to be able to control the Suez Canal on the north side, China has a base in Djibouti, which is around the Horn of Africa, which is on the south side of the Suez Canal. And Russia and China are kind of in cahoots with each other and work really pretty closely. So if you could have them somehow work together, potentially you could gain control of the Suez Canal. Now, whether you used it to stop trade or only let through certain types of trade, you could effectively control a huge portion of international trade coming in and around from Europe and North Africa into Asia and Australia, and basically force everyone else to either, pay the troll toll and go through Russian and Chinese controlled waters, or have to sail all the way around Africa to get things down there. The other part of this too is with the Russians acting in and around Cuba, you kind of get this like Cuban Missile Crisis effect, to where if you happen to have ballistic missile capable ships and submarines operating that closely to the United States, it becomes this issue to where even if we do have ships and aircraft and satellites and everything tracking these guys, that even if we did that, it makes you question like the amount of time between the Russians deciding to do something and your response time in the United States. Like if a Russian submarine loaded with ballistic missiles were to launch and make some kind of attack on the United States, what would your response time be? It's fairly close. I imagine it would be only within a handful of minutes. How prepared can you really be for something like that? And realistically, if they really wanted to cause a large amount of damage, they wouldn't even have to go nuclear, and they wouldn't have to nuke somewhere in the United States. If they were smart about it, what they could do is either have the Russian Navy do it directly, or in the book 1 second after, they kind of discuss an idea like this where they have a cargo ship. It's a fake cargo ship. It's a naval vessel disguised as a cargo ship, and inside one of the cargo containers basically is a missile system that launches a nuclear payload above the United States and above a certain intersection. I believe it's in like Kansas. It's basically the geographical center of the United States, and EMPs us. It's a very real possibility in the modern day and age. Between cyber attacks that could shut down power grids and the ability of nations to just launch nuclear weapons or use weaponized satellites, EMP becomes a much more viable option. And the biggest thing about it is, like, if you used an EMP, for example, you wouldn't necessarily have to even engage in open direct conflict with a country. If you EMP'd the United States, it would cause such a devastating effect to the people at home, having literally no power. Nothing electronic working, that so much of the United States response would have to be focused on taking care of itself, that it would extremely limit our capability to respond in any meaningful way. If you think about, like, we have hundreds of thousands of troops stationed all over the world, so we do have foreign bases that would be armed, ready to roll, right? But every weapon they use, every rocket that's fired, every missile that's fired, every tracking or guidance system that's used or lost, every round that's fired, how easy is that to replace when your nation is EMP'd without electricity and able to replace the things that you need, right? For every tank that's lost, how can we produce more if the factories to produce them have been EMP'd, right? So these are things that I think are, when you look at certain things like this, I'm not saying that necessarily that's what's going to happen out of this, but it's just something to think about and kind of be like, oh man, what would you do in your life in a situation like this? Like, you wake up tomorrow and the power doesn't come on, and it doesn't come on ever again. Are you prepared for that? I think of things like, if this happens during certain times of the year, like if this happens right now during summertime, are you prepared to be able to make it through a summer without air conditioning? I know that sounds like a super lame millennial kind of thing to say, like, oh, we don't have any air conditioning. But like in certain parts of the country, like if you're in Phoenix, Arizona, like that's a legit question. You know what I mean? Like I know people, yes, people lived down there before air conditioning. I get it, right? But for your average person in their average living situation, I think that would be pretty hard to do to make it through 115-degree summer consistently the entire summer with, you know, the current living situation of Arizona. I mean, heck, even up here, you know, it gets above 100 for like 3 or 4 weeks in a row, and it's unbearable. A lot of the houses up where I'm at, you know, aren't made with AC because it really only like I said, it only gets, you know, that hot for just such a short amount of time. It's pretty temperate the rest of the time, and then summertime is when wintertime is when it really gets bad and it gets cold. So most houses here are built to keep in the heat. So summertime can be a little rough in the Pacific Northwest when it comes to like heat waves. But you know, things to think about with that. Like, how would you be prepared for that? What would you do? What could you think that you could do to prepare for something like that? And you know, to pay attention to stuff like this. Is every instance of this going to result in World War III? No, but I think a lot of the posturing is there, and to kind of notice, like, okay, well, you know, what are these countries willing to do? You know, I mean, that's a pretty provocative move from Russia to move those people down there. You know, it's every year the Russians and Chinese have joint naval games in the Pacific. They've come pretty close to Alaska before. They've come pretty close to Hawaii and other naval bases and off the coast of, you know, the Pacific and the Atlantic. And it's all kind of a big show of force and puff out our chests and like, look at us, here we are, blah, 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 hear me roar. So it's a lot of times it's a big nothing burger, and it's just, you know, international politics showing off and saying, hey, here's what, you know, we can do. But it's one thing to just, you know, keep in mind that, like, hey, this is the capability that our nation, these other nations have. The idea that, like, we're separated by two oceans and completely isolated like we were in World War II is not as much of a viable option as it was back then. You know, the world's getting smaller, and the distances that once saved us are not as helpful as they used to be. You know, on top of that, although we do have a large amount of production capability, if you think about some of the things that are going on internationally with support for Ukraine, with support for Taiwan, and all the potential that has to turn into international conflict with the United States, we don't have the capability that we had in the 40s. You know, how much of our production capability has been sent overseas, not just to China, but just to, you know, to a lot of places. How much of our stuff is truly made solely in the United States? And if we were to go to a total war type of scenario where we had every company in the, you know, in the nation focused on pumping out stuff for the war effort for a potential World War III scenario, how long would that spin up process take? You know, Blinkov's Battlegrounds is a really interesting video, and check him out too on YouTube if you get a chance. Blinkov's Battlegrounds, where he kind of compared the production capability of the United States in World War II with how easy it was with that technology at the time to pump out a fighter jet, with how long it would take to do the same thing by today's standards. And basically, general consensus across the board is, and I think we can learn this a lot from the seeing in the Ukraine, we cannot replace things fast enough. Even if you had a company like Boeing stop building any civilian airliners and solely focus on F-16 fighter jets and older versions of it, mind you, simplified versions of cutting corners to make things simple and just mass produce them, like we did with World War II aircraft, it would take like a year to get the production line up and running, right? So we'd be sustaining combat losses at a pretty, you know, egregious rate for a year with almost unreplaceable, unable to replace those losses for almost a year. So by the time we actually get these things out there, how bad has it gotten? How bad have things got? You know, these are things to think about, that it's not this idea that like, oh, we'll just immediately stomp the yard day one. So as a concerned citizen, kind of getting to the point here, as a concerned citizen and a prepared person and a Minuteman, you know, you need to be prepared for certain eventualities that are, or at least be aware of certain eventualities that might be on your immediate scope, right? Because I'm sure you're probably thinking to yourself, like, well, I'm one dude, I got a wife and kids, like, what the hell am I going to do about that? You know, be prepared in a way to go, to have your family ready with go bags, with the gear you need, with being able to grow food, procure water, have medical supplies, to be able to feed yourself and take care of yourself. in a potentially dangerous scenario. Because one thing to think about is that even if the United States is doing okay, even if the oceans do keep us safe, even if we are taking the fight to the enemy, in a World War III style scenario, just like in World War I and World War II, rationing is more than likely going to become a thing. We saw in COVID how easy the supply chain was to be disrupted. And that was international, right? I mean, even just within the United States, even too, seeing how simple like the United States chain was, how easily the supply chain can be interrupted and how hard it can be to immediately to find things, or the price hikes we saw on certain things. I mean, think about how like crazy it was when everyone just went out and took out all of the toilet paper, or how many stores would go out and be like, you can only take one thing of chicken, or you can only take one thing of toilet paper per person, right? That's basically what you're going to be experiencing, but permanently, like ongoing during that time of war. Because if it gets to a total war type of World War III scenario, you can guarantee, especially with the low draft numbers, I mean, with the low numbers that we have now, there'll be some type of draft. Whether that's recalling prior service, whether that is drafting, young men and women, whatever that looks like, you can almost guarantee there will be some type of draft. There will be rationing. There will be, making sure that basically you're only allowed to have so much meat this month because we got to have meat for the war effort, or you're only allowed to have so much power because we need power to produce weapons. Things like that. These are realities that we haven't faced in a long time, but were very commonplace prior to the 50s. Like, this was extremely the norm. Every time we'd have a war, can drives and victory gardens, things like this. That was something that was not out of place. That was expected. That was standard. So these are things that I think, unfortunately, we kind of have to start thinking about. Realistically, if you look at it, the time in the last 75 years that we've lived, or 80 years rather, since the end of World War II, have been an almost unprecedented era of peacetime in world history, of prosperity, of global prominence, of raising countries up. I mean, there has never been a more prosperous period in America. In world history, where countries have been raised out of poverty at rapid rates, right? We've seen have there been wars and such? Yes. Have we seen major powers fighting directly against each other? No. Like, the entirety of the Cold War is basically small little hotshot flare-ups here and there, but no, like, World War style, colonial war style, empire versus empire style conflict in the last 75 years, which is an unprecedented thing in world history. So all things come to an end, and that cannot, that kind of era cannot be sustained long term. And I think that realistically, as we see kind of what most of us would see, I would say, is like the decline of the American empire. We're going to start seeing kind of going back from a unipolar world where it was what America says, my way or the highway, to a multipolar world where you're going to have not one global superpower, which, again, very rare instances in the world of that happening, but you're going to have regional powers or multiple world powers. So think like during the colonial era, you had France, Spain, England, and the Dutch. Those, and a little bit of the Portuguese. These were the powers that ran the world, right? They had basically 5 nations that ran everything, and the Ottomans. So 6 nations that ran everything, right? They colonized everywhere. They took over the whole world. They controlled trade. They controlled war. Whatever one of those countries did affected the rest of the world. I think that's what we're realistically going to start heading back to, is this idea of, that it's not just going to be what America says anymore. There's going to be nations that listen to America, and we have our, quote unquote, colonial, kind of expansion into, or, influence over. There's going to be ones that Russia controls. There's going to be ones that China controls. There's going to be independent parties out there that just don't want anything to do with either side, that are going to be powerful enough on their own to do their own thing. And I think that that's what we're seeing as this global challenge to this idea of American hegemony that we as prepared citizens need to prepare for, to where, we've all seen price increases on everyday goods, on preparedness goods. We need to be able to start building our communities and start building our stockpiles of supplies and goods to be able to be replenished by ourselves. We need to be, start growing gardens. If you live in an area where you don't have a yard, you don't have an area to grow a garden, get windowsill gardens, start growing vegetables. If you have a way to, get to have chickens or beef or cattle or anything like that to where you can grow a meat source, do it. Start meeting up with your communities and find out how can you become more self-sufficient. In what ways can you provide more things to yourself? Because realistically, what I think is going to happen is that we kind of see certain global catastrophes rise or the potential for global war and things like this, along with that rationing I was talking about, you're going to start seeing more government dependence. And I think that's going to be the way that they do it, is that if you cause a crisis, like, another world war that leads to rationing, well, then the government's in control of food supply, which means your livelihood is now based on your loyalty to the government, whoever that be in charge, whether that be left, right, indifferent. If you disagree with the status quo, you might not get fed that month. You might not receive your rations. So the more ability that you have to feed yourself, to water yourself, to take care of yourself medically, to do all of these things yourself, the more ability you have to do that, the less you have to rely on a government that will use those things against you to control you. So the more likely you are to be able to be more secure. And realistically, I think that food security is going to be a much larger thing than security with a firearm, right? That's the sexy part of it. But realistically, I think, even people who are anti-gun or people just who don't have guns yet or don't want guns, you will be so much better off if you can start getting a hold of replacing certain things in your diet with things you can grow yourself. Start replacing, certain things on that grocery bill with, the tomatoes you're growing yourself, with the corn you're growing yourself, with the chickens you're growing yourself. Though that kind of self-reliability at whatever level that you're able to sustain, whether it be you have a windowsill tomato plant and, a potted potato plant, or whether you've got a massive, complex and you live out in the boonies and you've got, 1,000 chickens running around and 30 head of cattle and, a pig farm, whatever your capability is in there. To the best of your capability, start getting more and more self-sufficient, because that is the only way I think that we move forward from this. Because as the economy continues to tank, as global issues start to become more and more of a concern, I think that realistically moving forward, that's the only way that we win, is that we become so self-sufficient that it doesn't matter what the government says or what the government does, that we will feed ourselves, we will feed our families, and we will take care of our communities, and we will look out for each other and not rely on the government to do it for us. And I think realistically that's the only way that we take care of ourselves and we move forward from this, and we make it to where no matter what situation happens, no matter if war comes down the line, if another Great Depression comes down the line, whatever it is, the way that we succeed and we move forward will be to work together to build ourselves to be self-reliant. So that guys, has kind of been my rant and my ranting and raving today. For that, I'll leave you with those thoughts. So those mid-tier thoughts. With that being said, if you get a chance, check out midtierthoughts.com. We got a summer sale going on right now, 10% off of any of the shirts that are on there. If anybody has any shirt designs too, or anything that they want to see put on a t-shirt, I'm more than willing to commission some stuff. I have no problem with that. So if you guys have any designs you want to see, hit me up, let me know on my socials. Other than that, check out the links in the description for all of the advertisements I gave out earlier so the people that support us. Check out midtierthoughts.com. Check us out on YouTube as well. We're starting to put out a bunch more videos now on YouTube. Try to post about once a week. It kind of just depends. I try to post on the same day. It doesn't always happen. Getting up off my feet with this and posting a lot about more in-depth topics about some of the things we've discussed here on how-tos and different gun reviews, things like that. So check us out on YouTube. Again, there'll be a link to that in the description. With that, guys, have an awesome one. We'll see you on the next time. Austin, out.